So, picking up where we left off. So my big theory, which I can't prove because I don't read German, is that the German general staff has atrophied. They've spent so long not actually fighting, they are convinced their little war games and their troop movements and all that are real. And when World War I comes, this is the attitude the chief of the general staff is exhibiting. It's once the plan has been planned, it can't be changed. That's completely the opposite of what his uncle preached. So that helps explain how we get the disaster that is World War I. Now, the two plans we're going to talk about are the Schlieffen plan. I just have to spell it. Remember I said I'd have to spell it later. This is named for Alfred von Schlieffen, who was the chief of general staff prior to Moltke the Younger. And that's in red. That's this big sweeping movement through Belgium. Here's Belgium by the Germans. Plan 17 is the French defensive plan because the French expect the Germans to come through the same area they came through in 1870, which is roughly the Alsace-Lorraine area, right here, between Belgium and Switzerland, which would be down here, yes?
So what were plans 1 through 16?
I have no idea. I assume those had nothing to do with the Germans and they were to do with the French, the English, or the Russians, or the Italians. Did you have a question? No. Yes.
The area in French is fortified?
It is fairly well fortified, yes, absolutely. So the French assume the Germans are going to come through right where they came through before, and then we're going to have them right where we want them. The Germans decide to invade through Belgium. Now, here's the problem with this Belgium thing. Back in 1830, the United Kingdom signed a treaty with Belgium, guaranteeing Belgium's territorial integrity and neutrality. Okay? So Belgium had been guaranteed by the United Kingdom that no one would ever invade them, and if they did, the British would support Belgium. The Germans know about this treaty, it's not a secret. And the Germans say one of two things is going to happen. Either the British are not even going to honor this. I mean, the treaty is 84 years old, they've never enacted it before, nothing's going to come of it, on the one hand. Or secondly, even if the British support the Belgians, Britain is known for having a great navy, not a great army. So by the time they manage to, straggle up enough soldiers, get them onto the continent, they're not going to be a factor. So the Germans say, either way, it doesn't matter. Either the British won't honor that treaty with Belgium, or they will, but by the time they scrape together an army, drag it to the continent, they're no factor. They're no factor at all. Okay? So invading through Belgium is not a problem from the German point of view because the consequences of it are so small. The French, on the other hand, assume Belgian neutrality because the British guaranteed it. So that's why their plan does not involve defending Belgium because, well, the British have guaranteed Belgian neutrality, so the Germans aren't going to do that. Now, that's pretty short-sighted on the part of the French, you could argue, and I think that's realistic to say that, yeah, the French should have been a little bit more open to the fact that the Germans are going to violate treaties, but regardless. Now, the plan here, as you can see, has the Germans doing a big arc across, okay? 8 armies are going to be involved here. Well, 9 technically, but we'll get to that. When they invade, well, I'm going to hold back. All right, we'll deal with that. Anyway, so this is the invasion. Now notice the extreme right, if you're looking at it from this point, right wing of the German army is going to be to the west of Paris. Paris is not a target per se. This is not like 1870 where they're literally targeting Paris, but they want Paris within their zone once they've captured enough territory and the French quit. They think it's important to have Paris inside that zone. things are gonna happen that are gonna change that. So, let's talk about the Schlieffen Plan. It's the only German war plan for war in Western Europe. I mean, I'm sure they have other plans for other wars, other places, but for the war in Western Europe, it's the only German war plan.
So what would happen if this one didn't work?
Bingo.
You always need a plan B.
Yes.
This is just.
Hey, plan B is for failures.
Oh, that's right, because we're, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, but since when do we plan for just one plan? Where's what they call nowadays branches and sequels, which is when your plan starts falling apart, what do you do then?
Throw away the plan.
Okay, so right there, that shows you something's wrong in the German General Staff. They've got one plan, and it can't be changed, according to the Chief of the General Staff. It's based on a win, hold, win strategy. You win against the French while holding the Russians, and then turn and beat the Russians and win again.
Sounds good.
Yeah. So just as long as the Russians do exactly what they're told, everything will be fine.
Well, they never heard of make a plan, execute a plan, expect the plan to fail, throw away the plan.
Exactly. So again, we're going to hold the Russians when we beat the French, and then swing around. That's the idea.
Sounds like a quick and easy win.
Yeah. We'll be home by Christmas. We're going to destroy the French army in 6 weeks. And they do, in 1940. So they're only off by 26 years in 6 weeks.
Hey, but it's
I mean, come on, in the history of the universe, 26 years is like the blink of an eye. It's nothing. It's nothing.
Technically, they weren't wrong, they were just early.
Yes, you can see it that way. See, there you go. Very positive. I like that attitude. Yeah, put some lipstick on that pig. There you go. Okay. Yep, they do get it right in 1940. They don't get it right in 1914. Again, violating Belgian neutrality ensures the British are going to be involved. Again, they wave that away as, nah, the British either won't get involved or they'll get involved, but it'll be too late. It won't be worth anything. The right wing of the army is going to have to march because they're going to get off the trains once they get into French territory. They can only run the trains so far, and once they get a certain distance, they're going to have to march the rest of the way. And that marching is going to be incredible. And I will show you a chart to show you how much we're talking about a little later, because it's going to be impressive. And I dare say no modern army could actually march the distances they're talking about. Okay, we'll show you the details later. And last but not least, we're going to severely constrain our command, control, and communication systems, as well as our logistics. But don't worry, that's not a problem. Why isn't that a problem?
Because we're gonna quick war.
Because it's 6 weeks.
Yeah.
Don't worry. Yeah, we're going to have problems with this stuff. But don't worry, 6 weeks, boom, over. By the way, modern U.S. Army logistics, literally, now they might have changed it in the last 7 years. I haven't worked for the Army in 7 years. But our logistics system was literally called just-in-time logistics. I kid you not. That was the actual term they used, just-in-time logistics.
Were they at least on time?
They were in a static war in Iraq and Afghanistan. Would I want to be part of a war of movement with that logistics system? No. But in a static war, it worked just fine. War of movement, I have my doubts. Does this sound like that German General Staff I was bragging about? About that great German system they implemented?
No.
Oh, this sucks.
Yeah.
You sound like the Americans.
I don't know, even us wouldn't make some of these predictions. Even we wouldn't make some of these predictions. Okay? Some things happen. And again, I told you my theory, maybe it's something else, but something has gone wrong. This is not the German army that fought the Danes, the Austrians, and the French in 1860s, 1870s. It's not, something's gone wrong. Now, what are the assumptions? There are 5 assumptions that they're making in executing this plan. They acknowledge they're making certain assumptions. Firstly, they're going to capture the Belgian rail network largely intact, so they can just drive their trains not just to the border of Belgium, but through Belgium and possibly even into northern France before they have to get the guys off the trains to start marching. So that's a big one. The Belgians, since it's this little country, it's not known as a warrior country. They're going to basically fire a few shots, say honor is served, we resisted, and 2 hours later, we just marched through the whole country.
Can you repeat that? Belgians will only pick up a token resistance,
So-
small.
Yeah, so basically, the Germans will show up, they'll demand we surrender, we'll say no. The Belgians will fire a few rounds at us, we'll fire a few rounds back, an hour, 2 hours later, they say, okay, well, we didn't quit right away, we put up a resistance of 2 hours, so, all right, we give up. The Russians, on the other front, are such a big, disorganized mess that it's going to take them so long to mobilize their army that by the time they've mobilized the army, we've already beaten the French and can, you remember win, hold, win, we can pivot back to Russia, get all the trains going in the opposite direction, put all our guys on trains, send them to fight the Russians. Now this one already had Kaiser Wilhelm concerned, and that's hence that conversation he had with Moltke the Younger. Like, what if we were to switch the plan around and hold the French while we attack the Russians? How do you think that would work? And here's the beauty of switching it around if they had done it. The front that they'd have to hold against the French is small. The French aren't going to invade Belgium. So you just have this little front from Belgium to Switzerland. It's like 300 miles tops, maybe even less than that. You can defend that front. The Russian front is huge. It's like 1,000 miles. So you could more easily hold the Western Front with a minimal amount of troops than you can hold the Eastern Front with a minimal amount of troops. That right wing of our advance into France is going to be able to maintain a high speed. Again, I'll show you that's how quickly or how many miles we're talking about. So that's what, 4? We're up to 4 points. And last, but not at all least, the French are going to be unable to switch their forces that they currently have against the Alsace-Lorraine border up north in time. We're going to be so fast that they're not going to be able to pivot and get us. They're still going to be trying to reorganize their forces. We'll be in Paris. Yes?
I have a question. When the Germans say the Russians will be able to mobilize their army outside, that meaning they lack for the system, for the train system?
Yeah, the Russian train system is terrible. They don't have enough supplies. When World War I, when we actually get into the war, regularly Russian soldiers will not have enough rifles. I mean, they're a mess.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and quite frankly, if you look at their performance in the recent unpleasantness, the Russians were really good, like one time in history, World War II. The Russians have never been terribly impressive, except for numbers. They've never been terribly impressive throughout history.
I think they will the World War II because the U.S. cannot send
That's a large part of it. I won't say we should take all the credit. There was an awful lot of dead Russians.
No,
at the
yeah,
end of that.
yeah, or,
But,
no,
yes, and we'll talk about Lend-Lease too later on. We're gonna talk about Lend-Lease. Now, so there's our 5 assumptions. What happens if any one of these assumptions is wrong?
everything.
The whole plan falls apart. So how many points of failure do you have? 0. A good plan is done in such a way that even if certain parts of the plan unravel, we can still achieve our end state, whatever that is. In this case, if this isn't captured intact, then we're slow getting to where we're going. If they put up a fight, we are not going to get there in time, which gives the Russians more time to mobilize. Oh, and what if the Russians mobilize quickly? Uh-oh. Are these guys going to be able to march as fast as we think? Sustain that speed. Again, slows us down, and any one of these things goes wrong, and the whole plan unravels. How many of these go wrong in the end? Every single one. 5 points, every single one goes wrong. Every single one. Yeah, again, something's wrong in Germany. Not quite sure what, whether my theory's right or it's something else, but something's going wrong. Okay. Let's talk about some, I want to have a few quotes here. Three from Schlieffen, the guy who supposedly came up with this plan. This is one of the big controversies, by the way, of history is, did Schlieffen design this plan as like, we're really going to do this, or was he being of the old German general staff model, which is, let's create a plan and then let's mess with it. He's dead by the time World War I comes about, so we don't know. So his defenders say he never intended you to execute it as is. It was designed to be a template upon which we would then war game and see what worked, what didn't work, and refine the plan. And the knuckleheads who followed him screwed it up by taking it as, this is the plan, we gotta follow the plan. That's what his defenders say. His detractors say, hey, if that's what he intended, why didn't he say so? I don't read German. I don't follow there is an internal debate among German scholars. I don't read German. I don't know what the current status of that debate is. Okay? So, let's hear from the man himself. Okay, nothing wrong with that. He seems to have learned some lessons at the staff college. He gets that. We can all agree with that. You have to completely destroy the army of the enemy. Otherwise, they'll just keep fighting and fighting and fighting. Okay, good. No disagreement there. Again, Schlieffen.
Reasonable.
I mean, again, it's.
Yeah.
I agree.
I don't get it.
You don't. What don't you get?
I'm trying to read that last sentence. A strategy of attrition is impossible. Is it? Maybe I don't know what attrition is.
Okay, so attrition.
It's a long, drawn-out fight.
Yeah, a long drawn-out fight where we grind down the enemy.
Okay, now I get it, because
Yes.
then it's like, if everything costs so much money and this is drawn out.
Exactly.
It's not gonna work.
Yeah, because maintaining an army of millions requires the spending of billions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So again, in principle, I agree with this statement. There's nothing wrong here. One more.
I feel like this is gonna be like 3 truths and a lie.
Which was the truth?
Single.
So, here is maybe,
I could tell the pattern.
Here is maybe where he goes wrong.
Yeah.
In his belief that France and England are the greater threat than Russia.
No.
Now, if we're talking on the seas, yes, pay attention to the British. If you're not on the sea,
Didn't they have the best navy?
oh yeah, without a doubt, for like 100 years.
Yeah.
Okay, but we're not fighting at sea. Yeah, I know the Kriegsmarine wants to fight at sea. Oh, sorry, they weren't called the Kriegsmarine, then they were the Reichsmarine. They want to fight at sea, but we're talking about the ground right now. Okay, so Britain's no threat. They're no threat. And France can be easily bottled up, whereas Russia can't because that narrow frontier.
And also the population.
Yes,
Yeah,
Russia has a massive population.
Germany.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah. So if there is a flaw in his thinking, we're not on the plan yet. The plan, again, we can debate the plan, we talked about the plan. But we're trying to get into the man's mindset. If there's a flaw in the man's mindset, it's this. He sees France and Britain as the greater threat than Russia. Now, we're Monday morning quarterbacking. I'll get you in a second. We're Monday morning quarterbacking. So take everything we're saying with a grain of salt, because we're not in his shoes. It's not 1910. We're not German, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? So we are, in all fairness, Monday morning quarterbacking. Please.
Do you think if he had diverted his troops to the Russian front instead of the southern, or done that, he would have had a different outcome?
I think without a doubt there would have been a different outcome. Now, is it still the outcome he wants? Not necessarily. But if they can defeat the Russians, which they showed they could during the war itself, if they could have defeated the Russians fairly rapidly, gobble up a huge chunk of Russian territory to create a bigger buffer between, and understand, I'm Polish, so I can't stand either one of these two groups, okay? Russians, Germans, 6 of one, half a dozen of another, all right? So I'm not being pro-German here. I'm just trying to think as a neutral party, okay? You create a buffer with a whole bunch of extra land. You've humiliated Russia. They probably have another revolution. Remember, they had one during the Russo-Japanese War. They had a mini revolution, okay? Now, the problem is, at that point, how do you defeat the French? You're back to square one with the French. And that's why he's obsessed with taking them out first with a surprise blow. Because if we do it the opposite direction, yeah, we can eliminate the Russians. What do we do about the French? Now, because I have the hindsight of history, I say, well, that's still a better option because maybe they don't fight the French at all. Maybe the defeat of Russia is enough that when he turns back to France, France is willing to negotiate because nobody's died yet. But I'm speculating. You don't think so? Okay, and that's a fair assessment.
Yeah,
Yep.
because the previous call, the France is willing to
Right.
fight.
Right. And so what happens then? Do we just have a kind of World War I kind of situation, but without a Russian front? I mean, who knows? Please.
You could have seen it as they didn't have to worry about the Russians because they had proof from the Russo-Japanese War that the Russians got
Exactly.
involved, but
Yeah.
France was kind of an unknown stuff.
Right.
Let's take care of that unknown.
No, again, it's not, his belief is not unreasonable given what he knows at the time and what he doesn't know is going to happen. It's not unreasonable. Okay. Now, his plan is still a different story. The plan, whether he intended it, okay, that's screwed up. Even if you're at the time, there's too many points of failure in that. Okay? There's too many points where this whole thing unravels. So the plan still sucks, regardless of whether his perspective is correct. Can we agree on that? The plan still sucks. But his perspective, you're right, it could be correct. And again, I'm favoring Russian front first because I know what a disaster World War I is going to be. He doesn't know that, so taking out the French, boom, lightning strike, makes sense. Maybe it's about how we go about it as opposed to whether we should take out the French. Please.
Did they ever have any plan that the US joined?
No, no European takes us seriously at all in this era. And it's not until after World War I, after we participated, that it's like, oh, crud. Those Americans can do something. Not great. I mean, we're not World War I is not our like high point. There's again, the American version of what World War I was and the real version of what World War I was is
Didn't they call the soldiers that went there doughboys?
doughboys. Yes, doughboys. I forget the origins of that word.
Oh,
The
because
blue-
they wear, feet, because.
Yeah, they were puffy.
Yeah.
Doughboy?
Yeah, like the Pillsbury Doughboy. Anyway, so again, we can debate his mindset. He might be having the best perspective he could have as a German in the time. The plan still sucks. Okay, the plan still sucks. So, now, the declarations of war come very quickly. And what happens is that within just a matter of months, almost all of Europe is quickly in. You don't have to remember when people declared war. I'm just trying to show you how quickly it happens. Almost all of Europe is involved very quickly. The only countries that come later are the Italians and the US. But everybody else pretty much is involved in this war within a few months. Because they have old alliances, because they have old grudges. Okay?
Also, Italy, switch sideways.
Oh yeah. Well, the Italians had originally had a treaty with Germany. They were going to be allies of Germany. The problem is they'd already started having a falling out before the war, and then technically the way the treaty was written, Italy was supposed to support Germany if Germany was attacked. And that was the key thing. Since Germany was the aggressor in World War I, the Italians didn't feel they had to honor the treaty. Now there's another what if you want to play what if. If Italy joins the war in 1914 on the side of Germany, and suddenly the French are not having to just fight up north, but also fight down south, because Italy's invading, that could have resulted in a very different World War I. I think the French probably do lose under that circumstance. Now, is it 6 weeks? No, I'm not saying that. But that's another nation fighting against the French. It's another front the French have to fight on. Suddenly the Mediterranean becomes a big battlefield too. So you're going to have lots of ship-to-ship action in the Mediterranean. So that's another what if you want to either going to Russia first, that's a big what if, or Italy saying, even though you weren't invaded, we're still going to support you, Germany. I think that ends with a French defeat. Is it?
That England and France were like allies.
Yeah, I mean, they had been historic enemies, but the Germans had really done their best to tick off an awful lot of people in the days leading up to World War I. A lot of it stems, I kind of had mentioned briefly, Kaiser Wilhelm had serious childhood psychological issues. Kaiser Wilhelm was born with his left arm was damaged during birth. He was a difficult birth, and in trying to extract him from his mom, a doctor used some forceps and damaged his left arm. And they didn't have the knowledge of rehabilitation and stuff that we have nowadays, and so he had a withered left arm. It never grew properly. It was only like this long. And his mother, who was the daughter of Queen Victoria of England, his mother decided that the way to help him overcome this was tough love. So instead of when he fell, picking him up and kissing him and cuddling him, she would scream, "Get up!" And well, yeah.
Sorry, I tuned out and then I came back and I'm like, what? Oh, that was me.
He did not have a good relationship with his mother, and as a result, hated all things British, despite the fact that he spoke English with a British accent. And his grandmother was the Queen of England. Hated the British. Hated everything about Britain. Couldn't stand it. And so he had deep childhood psychological issues. Again, I'm going to play pop psychologist here, but it's pretty easy. when your mother shows you that kind of tough love from a young age, and you have a legitimate disability, it's not gonna go well. So his father, ironically, was very pro-British, and his father, however, died of throat cancer. He was one of these like 5 cigars a day kind of guys, and he died of throat cancer. In fact, in 1 year, his grandfather died and his father died, and he came to the throne in 1 year, in 1888.
Suspicious.
1888 or 1889, I think it's 88. It's the year of the 3 emperors. His grandfather dies, his father ascends the throne, diagnosed with throat cancer. They try and operate, it's too late, it's spread too far. Sorry.
Hey, we're gonna test your lockdown system.
Oh, okay. Do I need to do anything?
No.
Oh, okay.
Actually, if you wanna hit the button for us, that'd be great.
Okay. This is hopefully the only time I will ever hit the button.
Yes, sir.
Okay, push.
Yeah. Wanna make sure that they work when we need them. Perfect. Good. Reset it for you.
Thanks.
Sure. Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's okay.
And that green light should come back on after they, so the message would have gone to dispatch,
Okay.
so they'll reset it.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure thing.
So anyway, yeah, so he's messed up. The guy's got psychological issues. He's got legitimate, yep, it's on. Thank you, sir. He's got legitimate psychological issues, and that becomes, I hate Britain, I hate the English, I hate everything about them. We're gonna have the best Navy in the world. We're gonna be the dominant continental power, et cetera, et cetera. So he drives a lot of this. Now he's helped by having Tirpitz as the Grand Admiral. Tirpitz is the head of the Navy, who also wants a great Navy. He's helped by Bismarck, who also wants Germany to be a continental power. But again, he's the Kaiser. If he really had toned it down, like if his father had lived, that's another what if you want to play what ifs. If his father lives kind of a natural lifespan in that era, and let's say he lives another 20 years, dies in like 1908 instead of 1888, totally different thing. No huge German fleet, no naval arms race, totally different world. But that wasn't what happened. So anyway, so let's move on. All right, so how about that march? Remember, we're gonna have this big march and everyone's gonna march like crazy. Well, I wanna give you an example. 1 unit, the 35th Fusiliers, okay? This is a German unit. This is how much they march, and by day. This is August. This is on foot. This is after getting off the trains. By the way, if there's a word in parentheses next to it, that means they fought a battle that day, in addition to however much they marched that day. So that's August. Here's September.
What's the weather like? I know August in my Texas would be terrible.
It's pretty warm. It's pretty warm.
And they didn't have that right material for proper filtration. Y'all stank.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, it would have been horrible. They literally wore out their boots, because we're talking leather-soled boots.
Yeah.
They wore out their boots. Okay. This unit marched 403 miles in 27 days, fought 11 battles, and averaged 15.1 miles a day. I'm sorry, no modern army. Maybe an army in a place where they don't have vehicles or something in some part of the world, but no modern Western army could do this. Not sustained. Again, it's the sustained part. Like, could an army march 25 miles in a day? Sure, but they'd be shot for the next day. Those guys would be worthless the next day.
That's the modern culture.
Yes. Oh, here's another thing to point out. This is not the extreme wing of the army. Remember that army that's going to come down and be west of Paris?
Yes.
Well, it turns out once things start moving, the Russians mobilize quicker than everybody thought. And they grab some armies from the right wing and send them to Russia. So this isn't the extreme wing you saw on this in the map. This is the one that's inside Paris, to the east of Paris. So the army that wasn't there, that would have been there, would have had to have marched substantially more than this. Because you know that whole thing about that mathematical equation when you do the arcs, it's, you know. So this would have actually been short compared to what that army in the extreme wing would have marched, but they weren't there because they're in Russia, trying to hold back the Russian forces because they mobilized quicker than everybody thought.
And they expected to win the war in 6 weeks?
Well, Belgians destroyed part of their rail network. The Belgians put up more than a token resistance. Our 5 points, every one of them went wrong.
You know, when all this was happening, the German command didn't, you know, try to modify anything, just.
Nope. Nope, stick to the plan.
Strictly.
Stick to the plan. The last battle of the offensive phase of the war is called the First Battle of the Marne. And what happens is the German First Army and the German Second Army a gap starts before English. A gap starts forming between these two armies. They lose contact with one another. And they are struck by the French Fifth Army and something called the BEF. Anybody know what the BEF is?
Bid electric funnel.
Belgium.
No. Good guess. The British Expeditionary Force.
I like
You
mine.
know those guys who will never get troops to Europe, and even if they do, it'll be too late to have anything to do with it. They are there to exploit the gap that forms between the German First and Second Armies. The guys who, don't worry, they're not going to be a factor in this war.
So the people who were late to this, say, okay, not really late, but the British, they had better plans than the people who planned it.
I wouldn't say that. I would say they just got lucky and were in the right place at the right time. That wasn't a plan. That was just got lucky. But I'm sorry, you can't say the Germans are unlucky. Because the Germans, when you're the guy who initiates combat, when you're the guy who makes the initial plans, you don't get to be lucky or unlucky. You kind of make your own luck at that point. And they made bad luck. Whereas the British literally just did get lucky. Yep. So those guys who aren't going to matter, they won't get there in time, they're the guys, along with the French Fifth Army, that exploit that gap, and it forces the Germans to stop, pull back, so that their armies can come into contact with one another, and you won't have a gap in the lines anymore. But that marks the end of the offensive phase of 1914. And just to kind of show you the French mentality, again, that this is an army that's all about the offensive. This is Ferdinand Foch, okay, who will, by the end of the war, be the Supreme Allied Commander. This is what he says during the Battle of the Marne. He's the 5th Army Commander, by the way. Offense, offense, offense. That's what the French army's about in 1914, 15, 16.
My kind of man.
Here you go.
I think I heard another phrase in this quote. It was like, they have us surrounded, but poor bastards.
That's a U.S. Marine quote from World War II. Yeah.
Korea.
Oh, was it Korea? I'm sorry. Okay. Yeah. So, there you go.
Hey, did the U.S. Marine who said that, did he live or?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Chesty Puller didn't die till old age. Died of old age years later. What happens next is what's called the race to the sea. Each side tries to flank the other all the way up to the North Sea, English Channel, whatever you want to call it. And then there's no more flanks to turn.
We're still not in the trench.
No, we still haven't gotten to the trenches. And at the same time, by the way, down here, there's a similar thing going all the way to the Swiss border. Again, I try and turn your flank so I can get around behind you and destroy your army, but nobody's getting the advantage. We're fighting indecisive battles all the way up to the North Sea and all the way down to the border with Switzerland. And you can see lots of battles here. Okay? Each one of these is a battle, but it's not giving us victory. But it is creating a lot of casualties. And then at the end of that, we have stalemate, deadlock, whatever you want to call it. And we're not going to move for 4 years. These lines are going to be these are the only two substantial changes in the lines in the next 4 years. These little shaded areas here. That's going to be the Battle of Verdun in 1916. That's going to be the Battle of the Somme in 1916. That's it. Not until 1918 will the frontier change again.
I think I read a quote was like thousands were killed for like a few meters of.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what does everybody do? They dig in.
Ooh, recognize.
So now we're going to have the trench warfare. So what started off as just foxholes, you eventually linked, so you can see it's more crude here, then you start linking the foxholes, and then of course we get the huge trench systems that we are used to seeing in movies.
Oh man, you said the boots were messed up, right?
I'm sorry?
The boots were all messed up.
Yeah, and the most.
But that means transfer.
Right, we're going to get to that too. And again, all of the trenches, and we're going to talk more about those in the next lesson. We'll start the next lesson today because we're doing well. All of those trenches are going to be dug by hand.
Oh, no tools?
No excavate. I mean, by hand I meant shovels. I didn't
Okay,
mean
I'm like,
hand.
come on.
No, I didn't mean literally with your fingers, but I meant no bulldozers, no excavators, no any of that kind of stuff. All of them are dug with shovels and picks. So, why do we wind up with stalemate in 1914? Why does it happen? Well, we've exhausted all our ammunition.
Oh, yes?
How could that be possible? How could we have exhausted all our ammunition?
Oh, because of the laws.
What's that?
Not enough supply, it's supposed to be 6 weeks.
Right! Everyone's predicting a short war, remember that? Everybody says it's going to be a short war.
But I mean, they.
Not everything, but we're so low in ammunition,
Oh,
we
okay.
can't mount a major offensive
Okay.
because we would run out if we tried it. So yeah, everyone's predicting it's going to be a short war. Plus, here's another reality of warfare. Whatever they predict you're going to use, you're always going to use way more than that. Okay? Because the pencil pushers in the ordnance department do their calculations and da-da-da-da-da-da. And then when you're getting shot at, you're not worried about conserving ammo. Okay? That's not how that works. When someone's shooting at you, you shoot back. And the more you shoot back, they shoot back. And the more they shoot back, the more you shoot. See where this is going. Okay? So, we're almost out of ammo. We have almost no heavy artillery. Why do we not have heavy artillery?
Short war, why do we need it?
Okay, short war. Okay, that's part of it. Absolutely. What else?
It's heavy, so leave it behind.
If we're all about movement, all about rapidity, moving quickly, heavy artillery, how do you, we have no trucks. This is 1914. No one's using trucks to haul artillery. Artillery is literally being hauled by trains or by ox. I guess horses too, but horses are not really good for pulling something heavy. Those are your two modes of transport. We're moving fast. Oxen, they go like 3 miles an hour. We don't want that. We want light artillery that horses can easily tow. 4 horses, light artillery piece. Okay? So yeah. It's gonna slow us down, and we won't need it. Why are we gonna need heavy artillery? We're not laying siege to anything. Oh yeah, we are now. But we weren't supposed to be laying siege to anything. So we don't have it. It turns out our weapons were far more deadly than we thought they were gonna be. Most particularly one weapon, the machine gun. Everyone had machine guns. Not saying they didn't, but the lethality, the sheer lethality of the machine gun astounds people at the time. Especially when you are in a static position. Because the attitude with machine guns is it's not a big deal, you just flank them. Where? There's the North Sea, there's Switzerland. How do you flank the machine gun?
You call Switzerland to it.
There's nowhere to flank them. So, I mean, you know, modern infantry combat, you fire a maneuver and you flank, you get around. Okay. When you got static trenches, no way to flank them, and those machine guns are absolutely devastating. And almost all of them are basically the same design, the original Hiram Maxim design. Hiram Maxim was an American who designed the first modern machine gun, and doesn't get much love here, so he moves to England, and he eventually becomes Sir Hiram Maxim, because the British appreciate what he's doing. He sells to everybody. No, that's not the Ken Crank. It's a modern machine gun in the sense that it uses the energy from a fired round to cycle itself and to fire another round. It's kind of that. As long as you've got bullets, it will keep moving. The big water-cooled, big jackets with water in them to cool the barrel so the barrel doesn't overheat. That whole thing. Our armies are just plain worn out. Well, I mean, you saw why the Germans are worn out. But we've got similar stories in all the other armies too. They are just physically worn out.
After making their trenches and walking so much?
Right. We've taken casualties, we've done so much marching, we've done so much other stuff that they're physically worn out. We have a density of forces, and what I mean by this is we have a relatively small space between the North Sea and the Swiss border, and we have several million people on each side. So there's no gap in the lines. There's no point at which, but there's nothing guarding there, we can sneak it. There's no place where there's a gap. Now, Eastern Front in World War I, which seldom gets talked about unless you're a Russian or something like that, totally different. Huge gaps in the line, because the line is over 1,000 miles. They can't cover everything. So there's all kinds of warfare, totally different. If you're a German, for instance, and the Germans are the only who have both experiences, if you're a German and stationed on the Eastern Front or the Western Front, you had a totally different war. And plus they have a southern front against Italy, so I guess you could have three. Mountainous in Italy, open plains in Russia, trenches in Germany. There are literally three different battlefields if you're a German soldier. Okay? But if you're a French, American, a British, all you know is the trenches. But again, you have like several million people packed into this confined space. There's no gaps in the line. There's no point at which, they're weak there. And even if they are weak there, you can easily shift guys over to fill in the gaps. Okay? So, it's not an issue. There's no assailable flanks, we kind of said that. There's nowhere you can flank your enemy. And last but not least, guys, every war plan failed. Every nation's plan for what was going to happen when the big war finally happens, every single one of them. The French plan. British didn't really have much of a plan. But with the French plan, the Russian plan, the German plan, the Italian plan, the Austro-Hungarian plan, they all failed. Nobody knows what to do next.
I'm trying to find a synonym for assailable. What's assailable?
Open.
Okay.
Vulnerable.
Vulnerable. Vulnerable's better even than open. Vulnerable. Yes, vulnerable.
Yeah, I did not have that in my synonyms.
And then we have one last thing to consider when we say why is there stalemate, okay? In addition to all these points, which are huge and very important, casualties. Between August and December of 1914, these are the casualties by nation. Now this is total casualties. It's killed, wounded, missing prisoners. This is not dead. This is killed, wounded, missing prisoners. When you say casualty, you mean killed, wounded, missing, and prisoners. People sometimes misconstrue casualty to mean dead. It's not. It's all those categories, okay? Britain, they got off light. Germany in the west, Germany in the east. Austria-Hungary, and finally, Russia. I'm not giving you the smaller nations, I'm just giving you the big players.
What about America?
We're not in it yet.
Like,
We're at home hanging out.
Yeah.
and Japan's in it too.
Yeah, they are in it, but their casualties are so tiny because they don't really do any participation in Europe.
They mostly just did like supply disrupts off the sea, right?
Yeah, and they grab a few German islands in the Pacific. So there were like the Marshall Islands and a few other island chains that are now mostly independent island chains. Were originally German possessions. Then the Japanese get them. Then we get them, and then most of them have become independent since World War II. So here's the problem. Let's say you have the vision that John Bloch did. He's, by the way, deceased already. But let's say you have that vision, and it's 1914, and you say, look, I just want my nation out of this. How do you go back and tell these families that your husband, son, brother died for nothing? We're just getting out.
Especially when, what, does it go back to normal? Just the way
Yeah,
the
exactly.
world
What,
is?
no one's going to be punished? My brother's dead, my father's dead, my son's dead? Who's going to pay? Not money. Who's going to pay in punishment?
Justice.
Justice. You can't. Once you're in, you're in.
What about disease? How does
Disease will be a factor, but disease is going to be more a factor once we get into the trenches and we're there for a long sustained period. Here, diseases, most of these are, very little of these have anything to do with disease. There are some, of course. How do you convince your people that, hey, oops, my bad, sorry, we shouldn't have done that. Let's go home, and as you said, let's pretend nothing happened. Let's pretend everything's fine. We're just going to go back to pretending our neighbor is our friend again after he just killed, wounded, how many of my people? It's one of the things to bring it to modern day with the thing with Russia and Ukraine. How is that ever going to go back to being normal? I'm not taking a political thing. I'm not picking sides. I'm not doing any of that. I'm just saying, how is that ever going to be normal again? Now, I think most of the estimates about how many Russian casualties are exaggerated because the numbers they're putting up don't make sense. But regardless, there's things going on in Russia. We've got Russian men trying to get out of Russia to avoid being drafted into the army. There was those guys who showed up in Alaska. Did you see that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean,
It's a short distance.
yeah.
But it's the winter.
Yeah, I mean, just
You can walk across that lake in the breeze though.
supposedly.
It's like 40 miles long, but.
I wouldn't want to chance that. But again, there's internal problems there. Ukraine's devastated. I mean, they were basically a second world nation. I don't know if I'd quite call them a first world nation. They were a second world nation, and now they're just. I mean, how's that ever going to go back to being normal? And again, I'm not picking sides, but how is that ever going to go back to being normal for either country?
I mean, how did like Britain recover from being blitzed?
The British were still rationing stuff in the 1950s. I think they finally stopped rationing in 54, I want to say. So think about that. 9 years after the war, the British were still rationing. And as late as the 60s, they still had not rebuilt everything that had been destroyed during the Blitz. Because I remember watching a documentary about the Beatles, of all things, and them talking about there were certain areas of London you didn't go as late as the 60s because it was just, they were bombed out and had never been fixed. So, again, how do you just say, okay, we're out? You can't. You can't.
Why does all happen? Some mad monk is seducing the wife of a Russian Tsar, right?
Well, yeah.
And they make the beautiful.
That's a whole other thing. I want to leave you with two things: a depressing thought and then a humorous thought, to kind of, so everyone doesn't want to go home and do something unpleasant to themselves. The depressing thought is, how do you win a defensive war? Because that's what this is. For everybody, for the rest of this war, it's really a defensive war. How do you win? By being on the defensive. You can't. You can wait out the enemy. That's the only thing you can do. So to win, you've got a choice. You can either sit there and do nothing and wait, or you have to go on the offensive again. And when you have the trenches, what's that going to look like? That's what we'll talk about in the next lesson.
Best defense is a good offense.
In football, yes, I'm not so sure that works in trench warfare. And then an amusing thought. This is a clip from The Onion. If you've ever seen The Onion, the satirical news source, this is from their 1914 edition. The very first time I saw this, one of my colleagues at Leavenworth had used it. I stole it. But when I first saw it, I didn't know it was from The Onion. I am embarrassed to say I spent a good 5 minutes looking at this saying, how did the Ottoman Empire almost declare war on itself? Until he looked at me and goes, what are you doing? I went, did they really declare? He goes, it's from The Onion, you idiot. Oh, yeah, no, I knew that all the time. Yep, funny, very funny. Yep, very funny. So, the issue is, all this part is correct. That's why it threw me, because I'm reading and I'm going, yeah, that's all correct. Wait a minute, how did that happen? So, anyway.
Don't feel bad, a congressman legitimately thought Trump's got PTSD because of double war.
Right. And there was that whole thing about Guam, the island of Guam tipping over because we were putting all the Marines on Guam. That was another congressman? Yeah. Yes.
That sounds right.
Yeah, no, you can look up the footage. Just go into YouTube and type in Congressman thinks Guam will sink or something like that, and you can find the video. I'm not making that up. That's honest to God truth. And the person who's responding to him, the panel member, I can't remember if it was a Navy, I think it was a Navy officer, might have been a Marine officer. He looks at him and you could see this person going, is he joking? You could see the wheels turning in that officer's mind like, how do I answer this? And then he finally goes, no, I think everything's gonna be okay, Congressman. So, we got 15 minutes left, let's launch into the next lesson. Okay, let's launch into the next lesson. So, this I call birth of combined arms warfare because modern combined arms warfare will be born in World War I. Now, when World War I is over, modern combined arms warfare will still be in its toddler phase. Okay? It is not going to be mature. And that's why when we look at World War I, we go, where's this combined arms warfare? I ain't seen it. Okay? But it's there. It's been born, and it's maybe a toddler by the end of the war. Okay? So let's talk about what that really means. So, to sum up 3 years of warfare, we can sum that up with one word, and that word is stalemate. We're in our trenches, they're in their trenches. Once in a while we attack them, once in a while they attack us. but nobody's going anywhere. Nobody's making a major advance. Nobody is improving significantly. Now, here is a very crude diagram of the trenches. Now, let me explain something. So you have no man's land in the middle, okay? You have your initial series of trenches with strong points, okay? Fortified strong points, usually that contain machine guns and or light artillery, okay, very light artillery. Then you have what are called communications trenches that lead back to another line. Now this is very crude because you'd actually have another line and another line and another line and another line. And eventually behind all of that, you have your artillery, and behind that you have a rail network which has been specifically built to get men and supplies and ammunition to the front as fast as possible. And the longer we sit in the trenches, the better the trenches get, the better the infrastructure gets behind the trenches, and the harder it is to capture anything. Let me show you an example. This is an actual diagram of the trenches in 1917. So what looks like a river is no man's land, and every one of these lines is a trench. How are you going to get through that? Let's say you take the first trench line. Congratulations. What about the second? What about the third, the fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth, 10th? It's almost impossible. These trenches are so sophisticated, they've given them names. There are signs at the corners that are literally like street signs. When you add it all together, the Western Front from the North Sea to Switzerland is 466 miles. Behind that front, there are 35,000 miles of trenches. Now again, I'm a history major, not a math major, but I think that's 750 miles behind for every 1 mile of front. Anybody want to get out their phone and do the math? Something like that, okay? So for every mile of front, I think there's 750 miles of trench behind. You are not getting through that. Please.
After the war, what did they do with all the trenches?
Most are filled in.
They just dirted it?
Yeah, they go in, they fill them in, because most of this area was farmland.
Yeah.
So they, in some villages and stuff too, but I mean, most of it was farmland and the farmers just take it back.
Some of them are still operational,
Yeah, they
Yeah.
kind of like tourists.
There are museums and,
Yeah.
and,
especially in France.
yeah.
I mean, what do you mean operational? It's a trench.
Well, I mean, in the sense that they have kept them in the condition they would have been in 1915, 16, 17. Although usually the sandbags are replaced by concrete. So what looks like a sandbag is actually, like you take a bag of concrete, you lay it there, and you know if you leave a bag of concrete on the ground long enough, it solidifies, and then you just burn away all the paper. You go in there with like a little torch, you burn away all the paper, and then it looks like a sandbag, even though it's concrete now. Yeah. So again, it's just, the longer this goes on, the worse it gets. So the Germans were right about that. You needed to take this whole thing quickly because when you didn't, it all falls apart. So here are the trenches in the fall. Here's the trenches in the winter. Now this one actually looks really nice. You know, it's got the pine boughs and you got the snow. I grew up north, so I'm feeling all Christmassy now, homey and Christmassy. There's fall, winter. There's the spring. That's where you get your disease, and the favorite disease there is trench foot. Okay? It's important to remember that especially the further north you get in Europe, for instance, the Netherlands, I know the war isn't fought in the Netherlands, but I'm giving you an example. The Netherlands, when Julius Caesar showed up, you know, his campaign against the Gauls in like 20 BC, the Netherlands is a giant swamp. It's a giant estuary. That's what it is, okay? And it took 2,000 years of the Dutch creating dams and dikes and canals to channel the water away so that you would now have arable farmland. Well, when you fire artillery that destroys the dams and the dikes and the canals, the water has nowhere to go, and that's what you get. So the springs are always awful, and if you get a torrential rain at any time, it's awful. But I mean, it's particularly bad in the spring. Now these two guys are actually in pretty good shape. If you notice, they have waders on. They have rubber waders. It looks like looks like rubber pants almost, but I can't quite tell. So they might be what they call hip waders. My dad's a fisherman, so it might be hip waders. I can't tell what it is. But again, if you keep your feet wet for a long period of time, you're going to get trench foot. Trench foot is still a risk today for military people, for anybody, but I mean specifically for military people. And that's why you have to change your socks frequently. You have to usually use some sort of powder to keep your feet dry out your boots if you can. Of course, by Vietnam War, we invent what we call the jungle boot, which actually has holes in the side to allow it to drain and dry out better. The pair of boots I wore when I was in the service were jungle boots. I'm so old, we were like 3 uniforms ago. But again, these boots, these nice, cool leather boots, they don't drain well. Okay, they do not drain well at all, and because they don't drain well, it's hard to get them dry, and you're gonna get trench foot. Okay, so that was fall, winter, spring. What about summer?
They're the source of leather.
Now, notice, here's the German. Notice the size of these rats.
Huge.
What do these rats eat?
Human
People.
bodies.
The remains of humans. That's what they live off of. Because an awful lot, in the majority, we think of the machine gun as being the main killer. And it certainly stops offensives very well. But the main killer actually in World War I is field artillery. And very often what happens when you are struck by field artillery, we're used to thinking of from the movies, it's a piece of shrapnel, a piece of metal comes out, gets you, and you're dead. Well, in this confined space, what happens is when they use artillery, especially heavy artillery, you cease to be a corporeal being. You cease to have a body. You are literally blown up. Yes. There are pieces, little pieces of you all over. Maybe there's a hand or an arm or a leg or a foot, maybe. But an awful lot of the guys who will be listed as missing in action, presumed killed in World War I, there's never going to be a body.
There was no DNA testing back then, so, yeah.
So they're just, and again, there might be hands and feet or something like that might survive, but most likely nothing. And the rats feast on all that, and that's why they get to be so big, because they have plenty to eat.
So why did they string them and kill them? Not to eat them, of course, right?
No, well, you needed to kill them because they are very aggressive.
True, it's like back in the orphanages, they didn't feed kids meat because of
Yep.
Yep.
Exactly. So they're very aggressive, and you have to kill them because otherwise they're going to eat your supplies. They're going to attack your guys while they're trying to sleep at night, et cetera, et cetera. So they were just showing their haul. I assume this was like one day they'd gone out and killed that many rats. Ugh. Anyway, now the trenches, again, as I said, over time become more sophisticated. So the trenches up here, and then they start to build bunkers, bomb-proof bunkers underneath, which have a concrete slab roof. It has its own water supply, a well, okay? A heating, there's a stove, a cook stove here, which can heat the place. It's proof against gas. Okay, some of these underground things bunkers become very sophisticated. Now, most of them, by the time they get this sophisticated, can only be destroyed by a direct hit of a heavy artillery round. So there's like a sweet spot in the roof where if I knew engineering, I'd be able to tell you where that is, but I can't. But there's like a sweet spot in the roof where if you landed the artillery round right at that point, it would collapse the whole thing. But the rest of the rounds are just going to hit on the surface, and you're not gonna feel them, but you are in the trench, in the bunker, and you are feeling the ground is literally vibrating, and sometimes that artillery prep will go on for days, which will result in another disease. Anybody know what that disease is? Shell shock. Shell shock.
What's that?
PTSD.
It's basically an extreme form of post-traumatic stress. It will manifest itself mostly in two ways in World War I. Obviously, every war has its own unique difficulties. In World War I, shell shock will manifest itself primarily in two ways. Either in catatonia, guys who are just, and won't move, nothing, they're just like frozen. Or guys who shake uncontrollably. It's like having Parkinson's on steroids.
Okay.
And again, you can find, there is footage of this, of these guys. So if you look up on YouTube, World War I shell shock, you'll see examples of this. The most effective way to cure, the Germans and the British and the French all worked on this. The most effective way to cure shell shock, especially among catatonics, was the direct application of electricity. So what we would call today electroshock therapy. They found that really worked among the catatonics. It would bring them out. The pain was so excruciating it would snap them out of their catatonia. Yes?
So I did have a question, because you already mentioned these are the trenches, and then these are down below
Yes.
the trenches.
Right.
If you mentioned the trenches were flooding, what happened to these bunkers? Did
They actually will have, I don't think it shows in this picture, but they will have pumps, manually operated pumps, so when it's wet season, they can literally, some guy is gonna be moving a pump, and then he'll tag off with somebody else to, like a bilge pump, like in the Navy,
Okay.
to pump the water out.
Okay, got you.
And later on, some of them are so sophisticated, they even have gas-operated versions of that. So
Okay.
like little gasoline engines, like we'd use now if you were gonna pump out something.
I want to be bad guy in the trenches. Hey, we do a fight with Germans up top. No, I'm pumping, man. Again.
I'm on pumping duty. So again, they did have ways to deal with the catatonia, and sometimes it worked with the shakes too, but it wasn't 100%. And it was excruciating. There's no nice way of putting it. And we are out of time. So we'll